This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
Are you, along with the rest of the world, still following this Idaho quadruple homicide?
Yeah, I am.
Court? So I almost cut it out. I messed around with the edit for Genesis Part 1, which is the first episode in this series, where I had considered leaving out when we were talking about the genetic genealogy part. It's not 100% accurate. It's not completely wrong. It's just like we sort of went with what mainstream media was sort of saying because I was following that because I was interested in the idea that they did some kind of matching in real time. And I think you were as well.
I was. And so I think we had recorded maybe, I can't remember if it was the day of or the day before he was initially brought back to Idaho from Pennsylvania after he had waived extradition. And they released the probable cause affidavit. And as soon as I saw that, I realized that my perception was incorrect. I wasn't completely wrong, but like they didn't take an unknown perp's profile and run it through like GEDmatch and come and pluck this guy out of nowhere. What they did was they recovered DNA from the knife sheath that was left beside one of the victims, and it was a full unknown male's profile. And if you can look anywhere online and find the probable cause affidavit and read about how they got to Bryan Kohberger. But essentially what they did after they had examined like quite a bit of evidence against him, or I guess information against him related to his possible involvement in the crime, law enforcement in Pennsylvania had watched him dispose of some stuff in a neighbor's garbage can and his own garbage can. And so they retrieved it. They were able to find I don't know what it was, but something had a full male profile that it proved to be the suspect or the person who had left their DNA on the knife sheath. It was that DNA profile's father.
Yeah, to a pretty high probability that it couldn't be someone else, basically.
Right. And you know, it isn't like I was trying to explain this. I'm not a teacher for sure. However, I was trying to help somebody understand this because, you know, I think it's like a 99.9999998% chance, right? Which is very close to 100%. And they were doing the math on it and they were like, well, but if you narrow that down, like you're still finding, I don't know what the number was, but a number of people that would be included in that. And when you're talking about billions of people, I would imagine it's probably several thousand people. I don't actually know. But the point of the statistics there is that if you're down to where you're trying to figure out, like in this instance, they have an unknown male's DNA left on the holder for the potential murder weapon, right?
Yeah.
That direct comparison there, the fact that they plucked from obscurity, basically, some DNA from a trash can in rural Pennsylvania with a person of interest they were tracking, and that person was biologically the father of the suspect. While, that 99.9998, like it leaves open the fact that like there could be more than one person. The fact that direct comparison happened means that is the person. It is highly improbable that match would occur otherwise.
Yeah, and I wanted to clear that up as we started today's episode that it didn't turn out to be exactly what it was. So we were recording, and Con Air was going on, which means he was being transported. We knew.
Right. So that must have been the day before he was, because we didn't get the probable cause affidavit till the next day. But when I listened to the episode, you were right. It wasn't genealogy happening in real time like I was thinking, but it was still like a form of family comparison. And it is genetic genealogy, but it's different than where they're putting, an unknown profile and finding it a match through a public database or a commercial database, right?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to clear that up because I feel like I feel like the DNA stuff is huge, and I don't want anybody that happened to be listening to us to like misunderstand. And, I don't want to lose credibility. And you're right. I guess we may be there, but like we haven't seen an example, which I thought this might be an example.
Yeah, I think there's so many eyes on this case. Like literally every podcast I used to listen to has put out an Idaho case episode, and then there's so many groups on Facebook and Reddit and Web Sleuths, and everybody's talking about it. And I don't, I work pretty hard to minimize like the amount of times his name was said, and my take on that case is it got way less interesting when he was arrested. And that's not a slight on the victims. The victims are gone. Their families are here left to, pick up the pieces. It's not a slight on them. It's, I don't understand the fascination with that. And you've explained it to me multiple times. I can't dedicate a lot of headspace to that particular case. It just happens to be dominating the media, Gabby Petito style. She's been gone for quite some time. And, I don't understand those cases when that happens, but more specifically, I don't understand the audiences because
that's true.
The behavior of the people, not any particular person, but the people,
just in the masses,
media.
yeah,
well, in the media as well. Like they're gonna create ripples and copycats and other things. From the way they're covering this case, it's wholly irresponsible. It's unethical. It's problematic at best. But I'd already talked about it, and I'd said some things, and you had said some things that were sort of on the edge of being right, but not really correct. And I wanted to correct those before we got into like the stuff we're covering for today's cases.
Right. I agree. I feel like that was worth addressing,
touching on.
We will, and I agree with as far as it's an experience. I do realize that people are very passionate, right, about crime.
For no reason. Reason whatsoever. This case is just floating up there.
I don't think
like even as you're talking, like I have to steer you back because I get the fascination with it, and it's not that I don't want to talk about it with you. It's that it's irresponsible,
right? But I don't think it's for no reason. I think there's a clear reason. It was 4 kids killed in their sleep.
I understand that, but here's the thing: once you say that, and they release the probable cause affidavit, and this is not to you directly, like you, Meg. This is to people that are following the case. That's it. That's all there is. I have nothing new to offer you. I don't have an opinion on that case yet. There's not enough information there to gather the opinion. The opinion that can be gathered from what's happened is, they arrested someone, and it looks like they did police work. And the police work looks relatively solid. That's it. Everything else is sort of irresponsible speculation. All these other podcasts that are putting out, my opinion is this and my opinion is that, and these words mean that. So there's an FBI profiler, FBI agent who, I'm not going to get into her whole background. Do you know who I'm talking about when I just say those words right there without okay. I don't know what's happened to her. I don't know if without naming her, and I'm not going to slander her or libel her or any of the things that I could do here. There's something wrong with her. And she will stir up a shitstorm on Facebook and Twitter with the smallest words in an affidavit. And I understand, like, she has a level of training and experience that is slightly higher than the average investigator, which is the average investigator is slightly higher than the normal member of the public. But she right now is illustrating what I call the attention-seeking super cop concept, where she's talking about every single thing the police say. It's not even the police anymore. I don't know if you've noticed this, but like they did a search of his house, and she was picking apart like every word in the ceiling of the search warrant return of the perpetrator's home, or the suspect's home, the defendant's home. That's what it is. He's currently a defendant. It's because, from what I can tell, that people have added me into and that you and I have talked about and looked at, I am currently a member of 8 groups related to this that have over 750,000 active members. And that's if you glean out the duplicates. The largest group, I think, is 300,000 or something in that range. And there's, getting people together like that and having them just rant about non-information. Like, it's not information, it's nonsense. And I don't want to say that. Like, I would never say that to you, for 50 million reasons. My partner in podcasting, my friend, all those things. But have you noticed it's gotten insane?
It's insane from the very beginning.
What I mean is, have you noticed that like people who have nothing to say about it are saying it louder than everyone else?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
So I'll end up shaving this down a little bit. I can't stay on this case. Like it's like this case is okay. This case is part of the problem in the world, because investigators and lawyers and court administrators and the people related to cases look at the public and how they're behaving with this case, and it gives them further fuel to say, oh, we need to seal all this stuff. Because that's what's happening. Like, the FBI person is saying it means he's got an accomplice, or it means there's more crimes, or whatever thing she's dragging her Twitter followers through. I don't even know how many she has, but I'm sure it's way too many. The people who have the information and are doling it out in little dribbles here, what they don't understand is the way they're doling it out in little dribbles is causing this. Just be transparent with the case. This is what we have. This is what we don't have. And right now, they're playing these tactical games. The defense is playing them as well. But currently the prosecution is playing these tactical games of only having so much information out at a time. And that other information is now all sealed. From what I can tell, the first round of it is sealed into March, and then the other round is sealed until whatever date happens after March. So you've got 2 search warrants that people will talk about for the next 6 months.
Right, but nobody has any information on it. I mean, they're sealed, and
but why are we talking about it?
Gag. Well, I wasn't talking about it. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know what else to respond with.
Okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I'm curious because it looks like it's like, did you watch the movie Jaws growing up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did.
Remember the crowds on the beaches when the shark attacks were happening? It's like that, but it's like social media, real time. I don't know how to describe it. It's really disturbing to me to watch. What I'm guilty of here, and I'll just go ahead and admit it, I get fascinated by how people want to be a part of this. Like, I sit down and watch, I listen to a couple of the different podcast takes on it. 90% of those are terrible. 90 8% of those are terrible. And then I will sit and I'll scroll through and I'll read people's posts and comments on this stuff. And like an hour will go by because I am just fascinated at how terrible people are to each other. Like,
It's really bad.
a person will say a nonsense post or whatever comment about the case, but it'll be like theirs that they own and they authored. They will immediately have 800 responses from people who think they should shut up, agree with them, and disagree with them. And then it really gets good when you get into the comments. And like, it's like the blind leading the blind. And I'm absolutely blown away by how a case like this feeds. It becomes a cash cow for the media. That's your word that I stole from you when we were working on something else this week. But like, the media can't get enough of the clicks and the likes and the responses, and it just gets more irresponsible. So now I'm going to stand up. I'm going to step off of my soapbox, and I'm going to take my soapbox and I'll throw it away. Did you see the press release I sent you about the guy down in Manatee County, Florida? The guy who was arrested for the cold case?
Yeah.
Okay. This is fascinating to me because, okay, so this gentleman's name is Pedro Garcia. He's 40 years old. He just got charged with the charge. The way they filed it is it's murder not premeditated. It's from a 2006 case. So if we put our math brains on and we go back in time 18 years, this guy's going to be 22 years old-ish, 21, 22 years old. And here's what so there's a press release. I found a little story about it on Patch.com by a woman named Tiffany Rosano. It just says she's Patch staff. And it came out on January the 10th this year. I saw the press release, but the press release was not, it was pretty dry. And Tiffany did a pretty good job putting together what I call a blurb. The byline is Manatee County, Florida, and the title is 2006 Cold Case Murder Solved, Manatee County Sheriff. After 16 years, a Bradenton man has been charged in a 2006 murder. The murder is of a man named Guadalupe Vela, and he was 20 years old at the time of his death. On July 25th, 2006, Vela got into an argument with, at the time, an unknown gentleman who was thought to be a member of the street gang, the Eastside Crips, at the Santa Fe Bar and Grill in Bradenton. The victim was a member of a rival gang and continued to argue with Garcia outside the bar before both men left the area, and they headed in different directions. This is according to the Manatee County Sheriff's Office. But later, Vela went to a relative's house in the 100 block of 33rd Avenue East, and he ran into the same gang member. The argument continued and turned to gunfire. So this guy, Garcia, he's identified now as being that gang member that Vela was getting into it with. Garcia shot at Vela, and he hit him twice in the back while Vela was trying to get away. So Vela ended up being found dead in a nearby home's backyard. Deputies collected several 9mm bullet casings from the road, and potential witnesses of the shooting had refused to speak with the investigators. Now, in October of 2006, Garcia was stopped for a traffic violation in the 1300 block of 9th Avenue West in Bradenton. Deputies found a 9mm gun in his car and arrested him for possessing a firearm as a felon. FDLE did ballistics testing on that gun, and they linked it back to the crime scene and the casings and the bullets where Vela's body had been found. The rounds that hit the victim seemed to have come from a different gun, but these were other rounds and casings found at the scene. In the years that followed, separate witnesses told detectives that Garcia had made statements to them about killing Vela. And last summer, in 2022, detectives learned that Garcia, who was in the Manatee County Jail in 2015, had confided to another inmate that he killed Vela, and he provided specific details about the night and things that were happening at the crime scene. another prisoner at the Wakula Correctional Institute told detectives that in July of 2021 that they saw Garcia actually shoot Vela. So on Monday in 2023, the Homicide Investigation Unit at the Sheriff's Department, they got a warrant to arrest Garcia in connection with Vela's death. Here's what's crazy. This is the second cold case they've solved with the same guy. In June of 2021, they issued an arrest warrant for the 2014 murder. So 2006 is Guadalupe Vela. 2014 is a guy named Samuel Conde. The same guy who goes by Pedico, P-E-D-I-C-O, or Pedro or Pedico Garcia, he's like up for both murders. So he was out on bond for Conte's death, and they found him walking on the 800th block of 30th Avenue West in Bradenton, and they arrested him again. They believe this is at least his third homicide. So I have a number of questions for you here. This is one of those cases where the ballistics on this were done in 2006 and 2007. They link him to it, but I guess it's because from what I could find digging around on this case, what they're referencing as ballistics is projectiles that hit a nearby home at the time of Vela's death, they believe. Is that why they don't arrest him pretty much right away? Because they get this gun in October of 2006 after this has happened in the summer of 2006. They're just now arresting this guy.
Well, right, but they're arresting him based on witness testimony.
So that's what they're using to shore up.
Well,
because it's a bunch of jailhouse people.
Well, the ballistics, to me, it sounded like what you were saying was that, like, they found casings at the scene that matched a gun that he was known to be in possession of, but they weren't the bullets that killed the guy.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I don't 100% know that because I'm not looking at court records. I'm sort of piecing together from press releases and warrants.
So this guy is what I would refer to as an asshole murderer.
I just was going to call him a gangbanger, but I guess that's not PC anymore.
He loses his temper and he shoots people. That's what it sounds like is happening here. I mean, he shot the guy in the back, right?
Yeah.
And so there could be many more. More than likely, he has probably done it every single time in front of somebody. And in the interest of judicial efficiency, the best thing they could do at this point is probably offer him, whatever life. Because at some point, even though like he's not, because it's not like first degree murder, except if I were the prosecutor, I would probably argue that based on the mindset, like anytime you're like ready and able to kill somebody in a second, like that would be first degree murder, right?
Gotcha.
When it's not like you accidentally pushed them, they fell and hit their head. You know, if you're shooting somebody, I mean, you've got the gun on you. I could argue it, but it doesn't matter. But even though like he's getting charged with like not first degree murder, like you still only get so many shots at that, right? Like, I mean, it's not like you get to just continue committing second degree murder, right?
Yeah.
And so I really do think they should talk to this guy and figure out how many people he's killed. I don't consider him to be a serial killer. I consider him to be a person who has anger issues and access to a gun.
Yeah, he's definitely not a serial killer. I think it's anger issues. I could even see it being like just related to criminal activity.
They don't go into any sort of like details of like why he shot that guy in the back, right?
No, it's just an argument. It was like It was a pissing contest, is the way they describe it. I mean, even the other cold case homicide. So it was weird. At one point he was doing time for federal weapons charges. That's talking about Pedro. The other guy that he shot, Samuel Conde, he went by Spanky. So Spanky, he was just having a beer at a place he wasn't supposed to be. He was 25 back in 2014 when he was shot. basically, when the bars close up, people would go over to this place on 9th Street East, and they could keep drinking there at sort of an unofficial bar. I think somebody's house has a garage set up with a bunch of beer type
Yeah.
place, or somebody's storage building, I think is what it was. You've got Pedro, who's a Crip, and at the time, Spanky was a Sure 13, SUR 13. So they're just in rival gangs, and because we're mature and advanced human species, we think that if somebody else hangs out with other people officially and swears their allegiance to them, we should kill them. So that's what's going on. Like it's not even very angry. It gets a little angry, like get out of here. I don't want you in my territory.
Well, the premise of it is anger, even
Correct.
because the fact that like they have these rival gangs or whatever to begin with, that's anger.
It's so weird to me.
Well, it's waste. It's waste. It's a waste that like he chose that for his life. It's a waste that these victims lost their life, and all of it is just it's well, and also now they haven't been working on it consistently, right? But it's taken years and years and years and years for them to put all this together, and it's one of those cases where I imagine, or actually probably several cases, where like they probably have a good suspicion of who did this, and like they really needed that eyewitness testimony to tie it in to get him arrested for it. Now, he's just been arrested for it. He hasn't been convicted of it, and he'll either plead it out, or a jury has to decide, the credibility of the, what'd you call them, just jailhouse witness.
Yeah, there's several different jailhouse snitches or informants.
And so because of that, like, the jury, if it's a jury trial, if it's a bench trial, will be the judge. But like, the jury or the judge gets to listen to what the witness has to say, and they get to decide if that witness is credible, despite the fact that, they're in jail or whatever. And so, they really, I guess they had to have that to tie him back around. Because, in a shooting, especially in a situation where you're, dealing with people who aren't going to, like the people standing there watching this happen, they were like, yeah, we're out of here. We don't want to have anything to do with this, right? It's not like they call the police and they're like, hey, he shot him, right? You don't want to tattle or whatever. And so it's not like you're going to have a lot of DNA evidence coming forward, right?
Right.
As far as like him being shot. And so you have to rely on other things. And it sounds like now the fact that this guy was out on bond for a murder, like what is happening there?
Another cold case murder. That's what I was just like, he's not been out of even prison that long. Because then I looked up at one point, I pulled up his I think it was his Bureau of Prisons profile, and it said he'd been released in 2022. So basically every time this guy gets out for one thing, they just arrest him for another thing at this point.
I think this is and I guess it could be a strategy. I kind of doubt it, though. This is like almost a systematic problem as far as him like being in jail, getting out, getting rearrested, like that kind of thing. And the other part is it's hard to tell how much of a threat he really is anymore, right? Because nothing's that recent, right?
No, it looks like 2014. 2006. I didn't pull his whole criminal record because I realized. The whole
thing is, though, that like after 16 years, they finally charged the suspect in the murder of the 2006 murder of Guadalupe Vega, right?
Yeah, that's where we started. Yeah.
And so, 16 years have passed, and I always get concerned when, and I don't read it that often. I don't know about you, but when they so they issued this arrest warrant and they found him out on bond for another murder.
Yeah, he was already on bond. They issued an arrest warrant and they went and picked him up on the new charge. Yeah.
To me, I don't understand why somebody, I don't see why a person that's committed multiple murders would get bond.
Oh, so the other thing that I noticed about him, which that's definitely a systemic problem. So somehow I looked at his like Florida DOC record, and I realized like, okay, so first of all, he's kind of a miracle in the gang world. He's still technically a gangster, and he's
What,
40.
because he lived to 40?
Yeah, because he's 40. But what I noticed was, and he's, but I'm, so it's not that he's just that he's 40. It's that he's still doing this nonsense because he still has criminal stuff happening like his whole life. I don't know how affiliated he is anymore or not, but I noticed that like if you look at his mug shots and kind of click through to the most recent one, he has the teardrop tattoo.
Oh, how many does he have?
I think he has 4.
Well,
Like
so you're
it's
going to
a
be looking for 4 victims there.
that yeah.
So he's got 3, so there's one more, right?
Yeah, so I think 3 of them have been laid on him, and there's probably, it's probably going to be another unsolved shooting in that area sometime between 2006 and 2014.
Right, and so my point is, I feel like the best thing to do probably before we got here would be to say like, okay, tell us everybody you've killed. We're going to do life in prison without the possibility of parole, and because he needs to be behind bars. I'm not really sure. I have a big problem with. I don't know all of it, but just when it doesn't happen as much anymore. I will admit that, but and the reason it doesn't happen as much anymore is because like it shouldn't have happened to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Once somebody's committed a violent offense, and I would say somebody that has access to a gun, which would be about anybody, and then has the personality to pull it out and shoot somebody, like they just need to go to jail. I mean, once they've done that 3 times.
I agree with you. I don't know why he's walking around free.
He shouldn't be. And hopefully they'll take care of that. I don't know how much. I would be interested in like who the witness is and what they had to say and how credible it was. But
this one I noticed. You know what I noticed? I noticed that they waited until they had somebody who wasn't locked up. So there was one witness statement in there that was not a person who was currently incarcerated.
Right, but they had previously been.
I don't know about that. They had 2 jailhouse informants.
Okay, that's what my understanding. I don't know. You're right. I don't know.
There's a third person that I can't. I assume. But okay, that is wrong for me to say this, but I assume that if you're at the scene of a shooting and you're telling the story, essentially 18 years later, give or take,
you want something out of it.
You either want something out of it, or you're unloading, or you possibly have been incarcerated before. And you know how this all works. I'm like, I can't imagine. Like that's a take it to your grave or use it as a card. You know what I mean? Like I can't imagine that you just have this unless you suddenly get in this guy's crosshairs and like you just need him to not be there anymore because you remember that night he killed that guy. You don't want him to kill you.
Well, and see, that's why nobody talks, right? That's why these like gangs, like nobody goes to the police about anything, right? They handle it themselves. And that's why, and it's like this, almost like an anarchy situation within the organization. I don't really, within the group of people that do this, right? They handle things themselves. And so you're right, nobody talks. But yeah, so, anytime there's a crime that happens, it's either you report it immediately, right? You take it to your grave, or you get yourself in a pinch and you use it. But it's got to be it has to outweigh whatever your pinch is, right?
Yeah.
In order for it to be effective. Now, if it doesn't, I don't necessarily, like if somebody has like drug charges or something, I don't necessarily have a problem with them taking down a murderer in exchange for leniency, right? Violent crimes always are going to trump anything else, in my opinion, as far as trying to get like justice. This guy has eluded it for whatever reason. And it sounds like there's it sounds like the cops probably knew and they were just sort of waiting. Or, it could have gone unsolved indefinitely. But if you don't have the evidence, you don't have the evidence. And that's that, right?
Yeah.
And I would assume that the law enforcement involved here, they would know this situation, the people involved, the area involved enough to know that without somebody coming forward, they weren't going to be able to solve the case, right? And that's a lot of unsolved murders, right? The ones that, especially shootings, especially those kind of crimes where it's not like personal and like, the motivation is basically anger, right? And obviously, and if we think about the three motives for murder, which are love, money, or revenge, a lot of times, and, anger could fuel all of them, but mostly revenge, right?
Yeah.
Because revenge is it's, where you want to like, I'm going to get you back and you shoot them. And that's what I imagine happening here. I guess it could be over money, maybe. I doubt it though. I don't actually know, but I'm glad that they are making strides against this guy. And this is the kind of thing like I would really like to see. And it stretches so long. I don't know if anybody's going, hey, wait, why is this guy out and what's happening here? Because I know for the most part, before I did this type of research and I looked into cases, I would have chalked this up to something I just didn't understand, right? I'd say, oh, there must be some reason for that. And maybe there is. However, it's not something I don't understand anymore. I have absolutely no question whatsoever that he should not have been able to commit, his third murder.
I'm with you. Yeah.
And that doesn't add up no matter what, right?
Well, there's so many cases that I read about where it's not murder related that people get life in prison for weird things, particularly when like 3 strikes laws and habitual convictions were like a big deal.
And like the mandatory minimums, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and mandatory minimums related to those. We would see like so many people go to jail for different types of theft and different types of, in some instances, like I call them financial crimes, but really they're like, it's more like, I would say nonviolent money crimes, because sometimes it's like a theft and an ongoing theft. I mean, I've seen people go for these little larceny charges that barely are a felony, but then there's also embezzlement people that get these huge long sentences. And it's not that I think their crimes are less. It's just like, I think this guy's dropping bodies. Why can't he get the same amount of time as the person who took the long sentence for embezzlement or whatever?
No, their crimes are less. People that commit embezzlement any day of the week, their crime is a lesser crime than murder.
Right. I understand that, but I'm saying it's not that I want them to get a tiny sentence. I'm just saying, why doesn't this guy's sentence match theirs?
There's a problem. And, I feel like maybe if I had access to everything, I don't know if he like made a deal, maybe, right?
I'm sure. Yeah.
That's my first inclination that he must have somehow, right, made a deal. And that's how he ended up being out to begin with. I don't know. And, plea deals aren't, you get the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
That's all you really get there. You don't know what happened in the in-between. And basically the defense attorney and the prosecutor come to an agreement. The judge, rubber stamps it most of the time. As long as they've agreed to it, they just, they say that's fine. So I have seen some judges not accept, plea deals that have been prearranged. But I think that when judges are looking at things, they really need to look into, why is this murder out? And that kind of thing is something a judge should actually say, like, wait a second, you can't leave this out there. And, that's why there are mandatory minimums now. And what that means essentially is like, there is no getting around it, right? You have to serve a certain amount of time. But that's newer. And I don't know how far back. If he was 20 something and he's 40 something now, that he couldn't have had that much before, right? It's not like he was committing crimes in the 80s, right? Where they could
No,
do whatever
he
they
would not have
wanted
that.
or
No.
whatever, right?
No, he's going to be like it's going to be late 90s and sort of moving into the 2000s. That probably is going to be the time he was the most active. We're going to come back to Florida in a minute, but I wanted to touch back on what we were talking about with Lonely Hearts Killers. I realized that a lot of times in the U.S., and I actually ran into a problem with a couple of these guys that we're going to talk about. A lot of times in the U.S., we don't get a lot. We have so much going on over here in the media that we don't get a lot of the foreign serial killers, except for like the very extreme ones. Like we know Bundy, we know Dahmer, we know the Night Stalker, we know BTK, we know the Golden State Killer. Like we know Gary Ridgway. All of those people come up here, but like sometimes the people that are operating at the same time as them in other countries never really like even touch our media. So I wanted to talk about a couple of them as we move towards this killer. So to clarify, when I said we're talking about a few serial killers, we haven't actually talked about one yet. We're building up to the first one. But we had talked about Lonely Hearts Killers and people who kill people who place ads, whether it's online or at the time period we're dealing with, it would have been in more newspaper and periodicals that they were using. And I found this one in the course of my research for the season that I want to mention here because it was bizarre. So this is a guy, he's known as the Cuckoo. Had you ever heard of the Cuckoo before?
I had not ever heard of him, no.
Okay, so he's an Italian guy who he was born in 1956 in Italy, but he actually naturalized into France in 1982. His primary name was the Cuckoo, but he was also known as the Classified Ads Killer. His given name is Alfredo Stranieri, and I'm going to be saying most of the names wrong in this episode because I've noticed that a lot of this is translated 3 or 4 times, and there's very little information available in straight up English about Alfredo or the Cuckoo. So this guy's deal was he met victims through classified ads. He would present himself as someone who was going to be purchasing something from his victims.
Well, it's a little. I felt like that. You're right. He is known as the Cuckoo and the Classified Ad Killer, but you saw that he was like. It wasn't like furniture, right?
That's where I'm headed with this. Okay, so the very first thing this guy does is he finds this little neighborhood area in the suburbs, the southern suburbs of Paris. There's not a lot of information about this, but it's the end of 1997. And he finds an ad where a guy named Frederick Edmond and they call her his companion. I don't know if they're business partners strictly, or if they're boyfriend, girlfriend, or if they're going to be married or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But Natalie Gerard, and like I said, I'm mispronouncing these names. It's how it is. They put an ad in the paper in 1997, and they say that they want to sell their nightclub. They have a nightclub there called the New Love. This guy, Alfredo, he shows up and he goes through all of the like appropriate steps to purchase this nightclub from them. And on November 7th of 1997, the sale is finalized and money is set to be wired, and he's going to be taking over the New Love nightclub. Except on November 13th of 1997, Frederick and Natalie disappear. And that is literally the end of that story. What he did, and the reason he's getting mentioned here is because this is the big deal. He then takes over Frederick's identification. So he assumes Fred's identity. And on January the 4th of 1999, we have no idea what this guy was doing in between the end of 97. We don't know what he did in 1998. I assume he was somehow doing something related to the new love. I could not for the life of me figure out what happened there. So the questions I had was, did he actually take over? Did he resell it? Did someone figure it out and he had just vanished? There's all these different things going on. But I assume that it somehow went relatively normally because on January 4th of 1999, Alfredo, using the name Frederick Adman, he contacts a man named Simon Cohen, who has placed a classified ad for his car. So this is not a nightclub. This is something pretty normal. Without seeing the vehicle or negotiating any price, Alfredo offers Simon that he will pay what Simon wants. And he says, will you come over to New Love? And Simon says yes. And he goes down to the suburb of Paris. And Alfredo meets him and tells him that he has a friend who's going to come by and bring a cashier's check from the bank to pay for this car. While they're waiting on this supposed friend, Alfredo says, let me show you like what's going on here. Let me show you my place. Well, Simon's not so sure about that. He's really just wanting to do the deal and move on. But he agrees to a tour of like New Love and like sort of this massive grounds that surround New Love. And Alfredo pulls out a 22 caliber carbine rifle, and he shoots at Simon 5 times. Simon makes a break for it. He manages to get away from Alfredo and sort of disappear behind they call it a commune. I don't know if that's literally like what they're meaning, like multiple people live here, or if they're just like referencing that it's a community and this nightclub is in that community. But he manages to get to a neighbor's house by climbing over a fence. That neighbor has heard the shots and sees Simon and calls the police, and Alfredo disappears. So Simon gets taken to the emergency room where he has multiple bullet wounds, and he goes through a pretty long surgery, but he lives. At this point, the police open an investigation into what's going on with the New Love. They discovered that Alfredo is on paper the owner, and that he has a criminal record for being a con man and for illegal automotives trafficking, imports and exports, and other things related to like cars. So they go to his house, which is in northern France. And his wife, Anne-Marie, is waiting on him to come home. So they sit and wait with her, and he never shows up. The Cohen case, this case, this attempted murder case, it doesn't even make the newspaper, really. It shows up in I think it's late spring. It shows up as a single, like, 3-line article that a man who was attempting to sell his car was shot by the person that he met. So Natalie Gerard's mom reads this article, and she has been looking for Natalie and Fred since they disappeared. When this happens, this sort of starts to draw some of the pieces of the puzzle together. But the next thing was pretty bonkers to me. In March of 1999, Alfredo picks out a classified inn advertising for a bed and breakfast in southern France. It is a very beautiful and high-end inn. And he decides that he wants to buy it. It's isolated. It's on a really nice piece of property. And on April 10th of 1999, the bill of sale is signed. And the owners, who are Nicole Russo and Claude Molly, they were in the process of getting a divorce. But on April 12th, 1999, they disappeared together. Alfredo is now introducing himself as his brother. Okay, so at this point, Alfredo is using his brother's name. He's using Mario Stranieri, same last name, but he's using his brother's name. He claims to be the manager of a large nightclub in Paris, and he doesn't even negotiate. He just accepts the purchase price, which was 4 million francs, and he moves to this inn, and then Nicole and Claude vanish. Claude has a daughter named Corinne, and after she hasn't heard from Claude for a while, she comes down to spy on the inn and see who is there, and she ends up alerting the police. The investigators at the time, with a guy named Colonel Jerry Plane, they discovered that Alfredo had been wanted for the attempted murder of Simon Cohen. But they didn't know him as Alfredo. They still knew him as Mario. So on July 7th of 1999, Mario Stranieri was arrested. He was arrested down in southwestern France. And the case gets put out where they form essentially a task force, and they bring in what's the equivalent of the FBI. And on July 19th of 1999, the police find the bodies of Fred Edmond and Natalie Gerard in the garden of the nightclub and the commune area where Simon had been shot, but where essentially Alfredo had buried them. And then the following day, on July 20th of 1999, they ended up finding near the inn the bodies of Claude and Nicole. Now, they end up arresting Anne Marie, who is Alfredo's wife. And on February 18th of 2003, 4 years later, he goes on trial. His trial lasts 9 days, and he ends up being sentenced to life imprisonment with a 22-year security sentence, meaning he has to serve 22 years. In 2004, the Court of Appeals in France confirmed his conviction, and he tried to appeal again in 2005, but that appeal was rejected. It's so hard to read something that's been translated multiple times.
I know. I was actually looking, I was trying to find the club. It was the Oasis, and then it became the Love Club or whatever. I was interested to see, like, is this somebody's house? Like, what does this look like, right? And I couldn't even find it.
So the Oasis was actually a restaurant, and then they converted it to a club because they had trouble with, I don't know if it's the health department or what that they had trouble with. It's very difficult to read about this case in the translations of it. From what I can tell, Alfredo's still alive, and he's currently 66 years old. He was very young when he was doing this. He was in his 30s.
Is he still in jail?
He's in prison, yeah.
And so I have a feeling he was motivated solely by money, right?
Yeah.
Because he was, stealing property, which seems like it should have been a little harder. You know what I mean? As far as, it just seems like that would have left a trail more so than it did. Now, the name changing, that could have added to it a little bit. And I'm not sure you're right. It is hard to read when it's been translated. And because words have different meanings, and the details could actually change what's happening there, right?
Yeah.
It just seems like with big transactions like that, it would be far more traceable than when you're talking about selling somebody, furniture off of the classifieds, right?
Yeah. These were not like your run-of-the-mill murders when you're like buying someone's bed and breakfast. It's kind of weird to me. So I had wanted to at least address this one. Now I have one more that falls into this pile, but I think I'm gonna hold back on that for now. I think we're gonna come back around to him later. That's also not an American case. And to be honest with you, when we're doing these non-American cases, in the course of researching an American case, I'm really doing it for the behavior side of things. And I wanted to show, like, there's so many of these Lonely Hearts killers that take place in different countries. He was the one that I chose here, but I was sort of going backwards in time, if that makes sense. So I was starting with, like, today we talked about the Florida stuff. Okay, then this stuff took place in the 90s. We're going all the way back to a guy that in the early 80s in essentially the Miami area, he was accused of 50 rapes, including some that were done with classified ads. And he is going to be the basis for the next couple of episodes because he has a lot in common with some of the other killers that we're covering. Before we covered him, had you ever heard this guy before without us naming him here?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
He's one of those that, like, I'm shocked he doesn't get more attention. But we're going to talk about maybe why he doesn't in the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would ask if you guys like the show, please share the show, or you can go on to your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple or Google or one of the more interesting apps, Spotify, Overcast. We're on all those different things. If you could go on there and leave us a rating or a review. I'm not going to ask you to leave us a 5-star review, but like whatever you think of the show, leave an honest review of the show because that will help us to grow our audience in season 4. We are sponsored by LabbratiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabbratiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time. This is Crime XS.
So